Me, Kento.
Go.
Oh, okay. Hey, welcome to Community Town Hall with me, Malice. As Zaylen could not make it this week. With us, of course, is Puka, Zeb, Valik, and and of course, Poison Taco, the terrorist, and
Hey, that's Mr. Terrorist to you.
Freedom
our,
fighter.
and our lovely guest, Party Squid. Today we'll be discussing the subject of social systems, both driven in-game mechanics as well as how guilds and communities can help better drive those relationships. So I guess let's open up with what does your group do to create social systems and drive group interaction within your teams? Who would like to take it?
Not all at once.
Do you want to start with looking at communities or teams within the game itself?
Within the game itself.
Okay.
Let's roll that roll.
I guess I'll just start talking because nobody else is right yet. So
I thought you were taking that one.
I think the one of the key things with that is first and foremost knowing your players, knowing what they're into, what they want to do, because there's tons of different types of groups depending on the type of game you're going to play, of course. But there's tons of different types of groups you can be running, and especially for like my community, we don't tend to focus on just a single type of gameplay. We tend to focus on trying to get groups together for many different types of gameplay, but we want to interconnect them as well. So even though we're going to have like a large group of people who are really into crafting, we want to get PvP in with them as well. And so they got to have mats. So we'll do things like group crafting events where, they're going to be going out gathering, but people are going to be escorting them, doing things like that. And so I think knowing your members and looking for ways to interconnect them into shared events is really important as a starting place.
I think that's a big part of... Oh, sorry, Puka. Go for it, bro.
Party.
I think that's a big part of making a group cohesive too. So Star Citizen, we're not yet at the point where we can interconnect pieces of gameplay. There's really just PvP and trading, and that's kind of it right now. But I think that's a really important piece of bringing everybody together is how do those systems intertwine, and rather than going to a specialist group, what are the advantages of knowing who you get all your mats from, and how does that add to your gameplay experience instead of just being alone and buying them off the market. I think that's what multiplayer games in general, that's their greatest strength. So anytime that you can do that, it just makes it better for everybody.
Well, I'll speak from the perspective of our guild, and especially being in this moment right now. Several of us here are actually going to be taking our guilds into ArcheAge Unchained. And that is a title that it is extremely important as a guild to enter into day one with a cohesive plan. Is like, what is our objective as a guild? What are the check boxes we want to do? What do we want to accomplish? And what actions are we as individuals and as a leadership team going to take to help us accomplish these goals? And it's extremely important to kind of have a very good cohesive plan and know what each member on an individual level is bringing to the whole. That is extremely important, especially for us. We will always be a very small guild, and so each member brings a lot, and there's a lot more weight on each member's shoulder to accomplish kind of the goals that they themselves set up and we organize as leadership when determining, especially around things like crafting. We don't want two people going gung-ho into the same trade. Like, why do that? Let's talk about how we can divide this up. Things with ship ownership, like why we have people own multiple of the exact same ship. We need to kind of spread this out so that everyone, we have tools at our disposal, and basically there's a lot of individual pieces that need to be looked at. My question to you guys as a whole, though, especially to you guys that have larger communities like the 100 plus, how do y'all address this within your communities?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about motivation, about having common goals. Because, again, my community size has fluctuated a lot depending on the games that are active at the time. We usually shoot for 90 to 100 plus within a single game when it's possible to do so for that game. But we do, like I said, diversify. So we will have maybe 30 of those people focused into economy and crafting, maybe 30 something focused into PvP, and look for ways to get them to do things, together. But ultimately it comes down to what is the guild focus? What are our core objectives? Because I think that is going to be a motivational factor for the members of your guild. They want to have something they're going to strive towards to achieve. And so take Camelot Unchained. Of course, one of our core guild achievements we're going to want to focus is building an awesome guild city. You can build, your guild keep wherever you want. And so we don't want to build something in the back line. We're going to say, no, we want to move out, not crazy too far out so you can't build something substantial, but we want to move out pretty close to the front lines of the initial, where we think the initial combat and stuff's going to be, and start laying down the foundation. So that pulls everyone together. We can say, PvPers, obviously you got to come here, you got to take land, you got to defend it. Crafters got to get in working with builders. And that is a way to motivate everybody because they can see something that is achievable, something that will bring, notice from other guilds, from other people if we succeed in doing it. And I think, having those core community and guild goals is vital to moving people in groups and in some sort of order, especially if there's a lot of them to organize.
And so I want to answer one of Zalen's questions from chat. And understand my comment about specialization of crafters is focused mainly on ArcheAge Unchained, only because in that particular title, how good you are as a crafter is determined by how much of your labor, which is a fixed generation amount for every player, how much of your labor you devote. And so high tier crafters have to devote almost all their labor to whatever that crafting skill is. And so to have multiple people doing that, frankly, it's just a waste, because all you're enabling is as you get to a higher tier, it allows you to craft different items of a higher tier that the mats are the same for anybody. So it'd be a waste to have two people be doing handicraft when it's either person could log in and simply craft what we need. You just don't want two people unless they really want to.
Likewise, you want to have a crafter actually making the stuff rather than using up their labor to process all the other materials. So as a guild, you can actually set up a legit supply chain to get yourselves all equipped.
But even those supplies, so the people doing the gathering, that is a skill in and of itself too. Again, speaking only from ArcheAge Unchained, but farming, gathering, mining, the production skills or the gathering skills, that is something that you want a person specialized in that because they're just the best. As far
and
as
Zeb, you have a point to make on that as well.
Yeah. There is a point to having somebody master along with another person, and it's if your system is a closed system where your guild provides everything it produces, or you use other guilds as well as part of your supply chain. Then it's very possible and likely you'll have multiple masters of the same craft, and the reason being is that you can further specialize, and then you could make, like, for instance, one guild could be a gathering guild, and another guild could be producing widgets. And the widget guild has multiple widget masters because that's what they want to be known for. It's all about their gameplay. I don't foresee it as a tremendous problem when you have a game like ArcheAge that is faction versus faction, where you're going to be dealing with other guilds in a friendly manner on your side. So your crafters and your organizers are going to be working with other people very closely and establishing guild ties that way.
I would say it's also going to depend on the game and on the size of your guild. You know, if you have 30 people and only some of them are crafting, then you probably don't necessarily want them doubling up on making the same things for your guild. If you have 90 people, you're probably going to need some people doubling up on some things to make sure you have the supply. So it's certainly situational, but I kind of agree with both. There's definitely situations and circumstances where you're going to need some focus, but also maybe some duplication. But you definitely want to be mindful of how much you're allowing to be duplicated, because if you're real focused and you're especially a smaller group, you don't want people churning out the same swords that Okay, you have to wait 2 days for your sword. So what? It's better for us to have sword and armor than just the sword.
So how do you make sure that the production and the harvesters are rewarded? So all of this so far has been sort of geared towards Puka, your end goal of building your city, and then Velik, you like alluded to PvP being the main focus. So you have your crafters and your gatherers. How do you make sure that they're rewarded for their gameplay rather than just knowing that they have contributed to the end goal? How do you get that sort of like wealth or production to come back to them as well so that they stay?
So I'm not speaking for all guilds, but at least, or even my whole guild. Within my guild, I'm going to be setting up the supply chain for light armor and stuff like that. And my personal rule is going to be as follows. If you help me get the materials, if you're the gathering side of the supply chain, you will benefit from my crafted goods first, before even me. So that way we don't have a case of the wealth flowing up within the guild, because that's just terrible all around.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Okay, well, so essentially, taking Arcade Unchained as an example, because we seem to be specifically talking about that. The one cost, even if you provide all the mats, there is still that cost of labor, right? And labor has an inherent value within the game. That is the thing that is generated. That's the thing that we want our crafters devoting to their trade and not other aspects of the game. And so, one, you do have to kind of have a guarantee within reason, be like, listen, we'll take care of the other things you need, so long as you guarantee that you're devoting your labor to this. And as well, like, listen, you get first pick. So say you get a and this is different, but, say they get a good proc on a craft or whatnot, or successful, like, hey, if that's an item you need, keep it. That's different now in live, but in original Arcade, that wasn't the case. Everything was RNG. So we would, someone would provide mats. They would have a kind of a stock of things they use, and if they got a good proc, that's theirs, right? They crafted that. And then give the person that was crafting the potential item that they would have expected. And also, they need some monetary kickback for their labor. Labor has value, and you expect that from the players that are making these request orders from them. Like, you need to give them some monetary value. The ease is more of a... and it's kind of up to the player and the crafter what they want. We definitely don't want them charging above market value. And we're okay if you charge at market value, and it's nice if you're willing to give a little in-guild discount. That's per crafter, and that's completely up to them. You can't have an expectation on somebody that's kind of doing you a favor, but there's always a balance. You got to find this balance between inherent value versus what you're giving.
As leadership, there's one thing that you have all missed, and that I know you all do, but you haven't mentioned. You need to honor your crafters and supply chain. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm giving you extra gold. Be happy with that." When you talk about the guild to the guild, you need to say this person is vital, because if not, we wouldn't have armor. This person is vital, because if not, we wouldn't have potions. This person is vital because they are producing those items or creating the castles that we live in. Another often ignored thing. The crafters themselves have to be honored in your leadership space.
I'm thinking about, have you guys watched Dark Crystal yet? The new one?
No.
The scientist gets all mad because everybody goes off to war and they say that he's too weak, but he crafted them all this armor and stuff. So that's exactly what came into mind, Zeb.
Zeb, I completely disagree. They should be honored to be able to craft the gear that I am choosing to wear. That is the real honor. Do you understand?
Using ArcAge as an example, like when we initially started on ArcAge, we started this layered system where we had people who were hyper focused on crafting, but we're generally a PvP guild, but we recruited a lot of people who were interested in the Farmville aspect of the game. And we're like, excellent, that's what you're enjoying about the game, great. And of course, we would do things like we would plant resources for them, we would expend some of our own labor, so that, because let's be real, labor costs are so extreme in ArcAge that not one person can commit to those things. So you have to
no benefit from their planting, so you were sacrificing that.
Right.
You don't get a skill when you plant.
What do you mean?
You don't skill up when you plant, so y'all were sacrificing useless labor because y'all weren't getting farming skill for planting, but they were getting it when they come back.
And we would pick it because that costs a lot of labor. So everybody ended up being, gatherer, farmers, just because you have to put out enough of that work to distribute that around. Now, what we've kind of realized over time is that system kind of fell apart, and everybody was kind of we have people who are specialized in certain tasks, but overall it's the greater gameplay, and people are involved. If they're our alchemist, that's great, but they're also our healer. They're also at war, and everyone's involvement is not about whether I reward the crafter, but whether we simply, in a bout of communism, if you want to call, make sure that I create armor, so I make sure everyone has armor. You create swords, everybody's got swords. You create potions, everybody's got potions. And everybody, you don't create anything? Great. We need you to work these 5 fields and generate X amount of plants. And so everybody just throws it in the pile, and so we don't feel a need to, quote unquote, reward a crafter because they're just as much part of everything else.
I agree. I'm going to bring a little bit of hierarchical communism into it. And that, I agree with what somebody else said earlier. You don't want the riches, as it were, going to the top. And so, like, when we look at things, whether someone's an officer or a leader in the guild, in the community, doesn't matter nearly as much as what they're contributing to the guild and to the guild efforts. We tend to have other ranks included into the system of our in-game guild that don't necessarily reflect. It's not necessarily like an officership rank. It doesn't necessarily confer any responsibility per se, as much as they are increased ranks for people who are the highest contributors in whatever their field is. Whether they're a crafter, they're the top guild crafters, they have a certain rank for that. They're top guild PvP people, which tend to be the group leaders anyway for those, but they have a certain rank for that. And then not only do they get the acknowledgement through that of us just going, you've done all these, you've contributed all this stuff, and so you get to this tier that we're kind of putting you on a pedestal a little bit and going, this is the exemplar of what we want our crafters or our PvPers or raiders to be. But then they also have priority access to things like that. If they're a crafter, they have priority access to the most rare mats for making their stuff. If they are a PvPer, they have priority access to the crafter's product. And we do actually expect that for those people, not only do they have priority access, but we expect that the crafters, who are the best crafters, they're getting free mats from the guild, and they're going to be making those things for those people for free. They're not going to be getting paid for it because the mats came from the guild. Now, if they're having to use their own mats, that's different.
They get paid in XP. They skill up.
But yeah, if the guild's providing them stuff, I certainly don't want to be giving them guild mats and then them charging guild members for stuff.
Let's just let's use a real life example for this. During the Cold War, there are very famous guns. In America, you have the M16. I'm pretty sure nobody knows who designed and built the M16 assault rifle. Whereas if you look at
specific person,
yes.
Okay,
but I'm pretty sure
the company that did.
Yeah, the company, but the person. Not very many people know the person. But
thought it was that stoner guy.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm an American.
But
of course, I know who made the N16.
Many more people know who built and designed the AK-47.
Yeah, but the problem is that the guy who designed the AK-47 died in poverty. The guy who designed the M16 was a reclusive millionaire. The systems rewarded the people who worked within it, and you're seeing if we go back to the game, if you do not create an internal economy, if you rely on favors, then your supply chain is subject to disruptions because your supply chain relies on a favor system and not an economic backing, an economic incentive.
So I've been experimenting with this single payer idea. So I don't know if your sorts of guilds have taxes or whatever, but in Star Citizen, there's intended to be a tax feature. And one of my mechanisms of naturally kind of vetting people who come to my group because they want to be there and build something together is to have a relatively high tax percentage, because people know that they're contributing. The way that you create that reward on a transactional level, an individual transactional level, is when the guild needs materials, or it needs PvP, or it needs missioning. You hire them at a rate that, and it's tough to do this within the game mechanics, especially because we don't know how they're going to work yet, but you hire them at a rate that will cancel out their tax. So you hire them at a market rate for something that you need for the guild. So that will also direct all of the players who might, maybe I have people who want to be explorers, but we really need people to go mining right now because we're trying to build something together. Well, they all know that they can get a little extra payoff if they switch for a day or two and do mining. So there's also that element. So if you're worried about rewarding people as like a general policy, having tax and manipulating that on almost a single payer aspect, I think
that is not where I thought you were going with that.
Really?
Well, again,
that actually brings up a good mechanical point, though, is MMOs that provide tax. Some of them have WildStar, Star Citizen. Other games don't. ArcGage does not supply, basically any tools whatsoever to manage your guild on any level. So,
but I think that's a system that exists and could potentially be very good for super large communities where a lot of the, the members don't really understand the full scope of what you as leadership are trying to do. And so just
games having tax systems.
Yeah, getting some money from them.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to wander down though.
You could go you could go into percentages all day, but getting a little bit to enable you is potentially pretty powerful. I'll say from our community, like again, our crafters are car mechanics, you understand? Like they're car mechanics that you want something fixed on your car and you want to buy the parts and bring it to them, that's fine. But are you not going to pay them for the time and their time is their labor? The point is, like,
I don't know, every car mechanic I know, I just give a case of beer and they fix my car.
Yeah, well, sure. And listen, I'm not saying it's got to be gold. That's the point. It's like, but there is, they are getting something out of that by spending it. You're right. They're leveling that skill, but there is still an expectation of a little bit of a kickback on that too, because ultimately, you're getting the piece back. They don't get to keep it and sell it. I mean, you gave them something and you have an expected return. And that's super duper important in refining too, because that's one of the most important ways that people level is I give you my raw materials. I want you to refine that. You're going to get a lot of tailoring skill, and I got to use this cloth for something else. I'm going to give you some gold for that labor too, because that's gold that's labor you could have also put with your own mats into tailoring and then sold that stuff. But you're not, you're not doing that. You're not gaining. I'm going to give you a little bit of kickback.
But to what Puka's saying, it also levels out your problem of one crafter being higher than the other and the gatherers not being as high, because everybody's getting a cut of the final product. Sure. And that's important. That's important on a mechanical level, and that's important on an economic level. Because on the economic level, when gold passes through your guild quicker, it means that things are happening. Actions are being taken. Labor is being spent in ArcGage. Those type of things accelerate your gameplay, and that's ultimately what we're talking about.
And the taxation method will work. It's just, listen, I'm a libertarian at heart, and I don't trust any government, including if I was the one I'm running, so the point is, like, I don't trust any of it. It's like, listen, just have it work on a 1v1 conversation and talk about it. But I say that coming from the standpoint of a large community. You guys have different challenges than me, and that's so y'all have to work out what works. And
I think it does vary a lot by game, because even with our system, as I've kind of described a little bit of it, it's varied for every single MMO we've been in because the circumstances are totally different. If if you're in an MMO where a crafter is not even getting any skill development from making something for you, you might want to develop something that gives them more reward for it, because they're actually not getting anything for the time they're putting into it. Whereas if they're at least getting skill development from using guild mats, then they are basically getting the guild to just give them free stuff. Like in TISO, when we were running really strong in TISO, we actually had this is the only time we've really done this, but we actually had almost like a raid points reward system for our crafting system based on the materials people would give in, because crafters needed so many mats to make things that we basically just had people mailing in mats. Everyone just about was a gatherer, and they would mail in mats, and we had points assigned to different types of things, and people put in stacks of just mats for the crafters, and we keep sheets of, okay, well, this is how much stuff you've given the guild, and the crafters would be able to basically kind of turn their points in essentially to pull mats out to make things. And so crafters just had access to just tons of mats for their early level grinding of their skill. But to a certain degree, they're almost like putting on a deficit of themselves, going in and getting all these mats, and it's expected they're going to be putting out gear and giving it out to other people. As low-level gear, we're not really as concerned about it, but especially when they're getting into higher-level gear and mats and everything, stuff starts to get important. Now, that's the only game, like I said, where we tracked it to that degree, just because of the sheer quantity of mats and everything that people needed to churn through.
Now, if y'all will allow me to explain... Go ahead, sorry.
Go right ahead.
Well, so I wanted to talk about another community that we've been a part of and a system they use that kind of somewhat helps mitigate this problem. Have any of y'all heard of Gashkia? Familiar with them? No? So they have, anytime they go to a title as an official supported chapter, they have on their website a marketplace. And the marketplace contains a database of every base item within the game. And then they look at the requirements to craft every other item within every leg of crafting within a title they go to. So every title, and they had this support in ESO and in Guild Wars 2 and in Rift. Every base item had a mat and what was called a family vault credit, right? So family vault credits were generated by you going to events and participating. So every objective that was broken down within an event had a certain amount of points. And so when the event was over, they would post it, a calendar event. People would go and claim it, and they would get a certain number of family vault credits. They could then go to the marketplace and order raw materials or completed crafted materials. If it was a completed crafted material, you had the option to send the raw materials to the crafter that discounted your price on the marketplace, but also discounted like what the crafter, when they would craft that, they didn't get. So if they selected an item on the marketplace, crafted it, and mailed it to you, they also got contribution points. And the system ate about 10 to 20% of the contribution points between exchanges just to keep them from inflating indefinitely. But the idea was they had their own internal marketplace where, based off participation in PvP, PvE events, players that were active in the community could actually use these to request from other players, and they had their own little mini game happened completely separate from the game on the website, and it was awesome. It was completely
it's a very neat system. But I'm gonna. We've really wandered down the crafting path specific. It's interesting touch on the social systems and how they interact with crafting, and that is awesome. But let's change gears a little bit and move towards the idea of how do your communities and how do you believe communities should interact with the other forces that exist on a server, whether it be the enemy, the allies, how to create unity, how to create derision, what do you find valuable, and what works for you?
Talk softly and carry a big stick.
Oh, gosh.
I actually kind of agree with that.
Lie and carry a big stick.
Well,
that's what
I think
it means.
My perspective going into it is always to form alliances with people in my faction to work together. And I think that requires a few things. One, it requires you to demonstrate that you have value, that your guild has value. You need to represent a very big stick, or at least a reasonably big stick to some degree. Otherwise, why does anybody want to waste time on you and working? And because alliances are hard work and figuring out, okay, well, you're going to fight in this area, or we're going to cooperate on this. That takes a lot of communication, a lot of work. But ultimately, it's worthwhile to help build a community. And I think another important part of that is, at least for me, we always try to even with the ones we do have, we don't have alliances with people on our server. We want to have at least reasonably good relationships with the guild leaders of the ones we can. Some people are just jerks, but the reasonable relationships with the ones we can, so that if everybody eventually has kind of a jerk in their guild, and so I think it's sometimes important to work together and smooth things over between guilds, because we definitely don't want like our guild members going over and taking a shit on somebody else's lawn, and it occasionally happens, whether from someone else's guild to ours or ours to theirs, and I think the guild leaders need to be able to communicate to each other to try and work those things out socially.
There's always trouble with partnerships, right? And this happens in real life too, where you have partnerships for the sake of saying that you have partnerships, and they don't really mean anything. So I think a good part about deciding who you are and are not going to kind of interact with on a more formal and productive, like marching towards the same goal, is you have to make sure that you have the same goal. And ultimately your participation with another group has to make both of your game experiences more fun. Now, fun looks really different to different groups. There's a couple like very formally military, if you're not X rank, then you should not be speaking while we play the game kind of groups. And there's a lot of people who enjoy that. I don't. My group is not built for that. So I think you just have to be honest with yourself and not say, oh, we partner with these people and we work together and look, we've got this big alliance type thing. If it's actually going to end up hurting you and making you less sustainable, and you're going to lose members, you're going to lose enjoyment. So I think the first step to all of that is saying, what do I want for my group? And then what can I really offer other people? And then allowing them to come to you with what they're willing to give back, and whether or not that works for both of you. You got to start there.
In a sense, that identity and vision is the point of your community. I want to be a group of crafters. I want to be a group of traders. I want to be a group of PvPers. That whatever you do, you are. But
you do you.
The identity and the vision are very important for any sustainable relationship with any group, even if it's informal. Like me and Velik's group are informal because we're enemies in the game, and I expect to be sieging that big city of his, and I expect him to be sieging my big city very soon. But the idea that our visions are not competing, it's our sides, our factional sides, is very important. And once you establish that relationship, you have mutual respect and trust, and you could even work together in the future with people that you fought.
Absolutely. I think some of the best kind of social relationships you can have in an MMO is with some of your enemies, when there is a degree of mutual respect, and we can go over there, and if they tear a hole in my wall, my keep, and they're coming over here and doing a reasonably polite degree of shit talking, we're certainly going to get a little upset about it, but we know that it's not necessarily a hateful relationship, and we're not necessarily going to hold that grudge, except that we want to come back and retaliate and return the favor.
That takes a great deal of self-regulation, though.
And I think something that's important.
It really does,
especially when choosing alliance members. Is like y'all have mentioned. You have to ask yourself honestly, what do you bring to the alliance? But you also have to go back to your players and explain, like, listen, this is what this group is bringing, and this is why we have this, and we want to foster this relationship. Because ultimately, it's your bad actors and your your loose cannons that cause these initial stresses between alliances. It's when you have players that have the social skills of a sack of potatoes trying to work together, that cause this stress, and it's like, oh my gosh, guys! And so you've got to be pretty clear.
You got to play it the other way, which is you just recruit all the people with social skills, a sack of potatoes.
Yeah.
They all run together, and then other people look at you and go, "Well, we need to find value in you, otherwise you'll wreak havoc on us.
That's
What
why
a strategy. What a strategy.
Just a swarm of
It's the
locusts.
Black Swan strategy.
I can also say with experience now over the last week, if you pick on the whales, you win.
Okay.
Target the rich people and you win.
Because the great thing about fighting whales is that the only thing that you can take from them is their pride. You don't worry about taking about their resources and all the other stuff like that. The loss of pride is what matters. Trust me, in Arcade, we used to fight the player nations all of the time, and they are far well organized, far better geared, far more efficient, far just everything. They would go in and handpick out of every guild they could all the best players of everything. They worked as an army and everything like that. So the only thing that they had to risk was their reputation. And we were like, lol, we ran off with some more of your stuff. There was only 5 of us, and there was 500 of you. And that was more destructive to them than any loss in open field in a big battle.
Smaller
Reputation
groups, too.
takes 1,000 days to build and 1 minute to lose.
You can never truly lose as an underdog when it comes to your group's morale, right? If you do something ridiculous for the meme of it, you can't lose, and you might have a really great win. So I think that's
George Washington lost every battle for 2 years in the founding of the U.S. 2 years, lost everything, and he still continued the army, and the army still continued. He's considered one of the best generals in history because of that.
Because he could write good memes.
He was a meme lord. He was a meme lord before there was memes.
just memeing.
Don't tread on me. First
No tread on me was a meme.
Jesus.
I took a couple org members and crashed a pool party on an expensive ship, and every single person we shot at spent over $1,000 in Star Citizen, and they are some salty motherfuckers.
And that's where that self-regulation comes in with those relationships, right? Like, there is a moment, and I'd like to say right now that if I was one of those people, I'm so broke, but if I was one of those people, I would like to think that I would message you and say, hey, that was pretty hilarious. We didn't see that coming. It sucked, but like, kudos. But there is a moment where your first response naturally is not that, because you've invested. So it really takes that, and people have to actively practice that. You have to encourage your members to actively practice that too. Something they need to be reminded of.
I go the opposite direction, which is I don't self-regulate. I go into open bloody war until one last man is standing, and then shake hands afterwards. But it's that, like, if Poison Taco had done what he did to my group, we would be in open war, and we'd be in open war for a month and a half. It would be we would camp everybody. We would basically both be camping each other on every star port in the whole entire game for a month and a half. Then by the end of it, it would be finally like things would wind down, and we'd be like, all right, respect, and walk away.
I think there's a big difference between open war and being respectful. And this is something that is still difficult to maintain for sure. But we always try to maintain, because a large part of it is preserving our own reputation. I don't want, even though if we go all out into war against each other, we're just smashing each other's keeps or your stations or whatever game you're in, and we're just like, as a guild, we're like, we hate them and we want to destroy them. I still don't want my members going around being openly disrespectful to their members, unless they've done something in game that is truly disrespectful, or they've done something that really warranted. I don't want our people going around and just bad mouthing them. Instead, I'm like, you can go out there and you can do a little bit of friendly trash talking. That's fine, but you have to know where the limit is, and it's the officers and the leaders' jobs to maintain that to a certain degree. I think, especially within your own faction, but also to a certain degree within enemy faction, to keep it from going too far to where it's just making your own guild look like trash if you let people just run havoc to it.
And that's not as fun.
I also support the idea of guilds having diplomats to other guilds, not the leaders, diplomats. And the reason is somebody in your guild is a lot more people person oriented than the leadership is. If not, they wouldn't be leaders. It's part of the reason that you're taking the lead. You need somebody. You need a buffer in between you and this group, because when the bad actors come, they need somebody to address that isn't busy with 10,000 things, that is only concentrated on diplomacy.
And also, it helps to have infiltrators as well.
But I tend to recruit usually one or two people or more that are very friendly, very socially interactive. They may not even be the best players in the world, but they're very good at networking, socially, all that type of stuff. Those people I tend to come into meetings with because I want them to be the force of resolution, and I am the barking dog. It's the good cop, bad cop argument. I'm just like, no, fuck you, screw you, we're going to kill everybody, we're just going to murder you until the game ends, or you quit the game, we're just going to ruin you, da-da-da-da. And they're like, no, we're going to, let's work this out, da-da-da. No, and it's like fake pull on the chain, like, and it plays well in politics, though, when you are trying to interact and work with alliances, is you play that, this is what we can bring to the table, and I'm psycho enough to do it. We don't want to let him rush you.
You can't lose yourself in that, because people will call your bluff, right? You got to be psycho towards your own goal. Yeah, for sure. Which sounds like is destroying people, which is awesome.
They're just cockroaches.
I wanted to agree with Castell's comment in chat that the greatest victory you can achieve over your enemies is making them like you. And I do agree with that in certain respects, maybe not in all, but in certain respects, because like one of my fondest MMO memories is still from EVE Online. Being in a small, really terrible corporation in there that I had no business being in, but got into it, and within like 2 weeks we were war decked by another like huge corporation, and just going like, what is even going on? Everyone just got trashed and like quit the corporation. But through the course of it, the enemy corp eventually invited me to join them, because I would not stop. I was like, no, I will destroy you all. And I was horribly outnumbered. It was not going to happen. But I still kept fighting them, losing like all my ships. I was just like, no, we will go to Wolfhammer. And finally, they're just like, if you just stop biting our ankles, you could like come and join us and come out here to NullSec with us, and we'll like help you get some more ships back, because we feel bad for killing you so many times. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah. Cool.
And that's it. That's exactly it. I mean, I have from like our days in Dark Age of Camelot, when we left there, we brought people that were both our faction and other factions. We went to Warhammer. Crap, we actually to the point there was this person that ran as a duo, and they would continuously attack keeps that we were trying to harass us and slow us down just long enough so that the big forces could show up, and they'd be calling for help and everything like that, but they were just harass. And so we started talking to them on the forums. By the end, we mailed them a real life pie, it showed up at their house, and they re-rolled our faction and joined our guild. Like, so we have definitely lived the life of the earn the respect of the enemy, or enemy earns your respect, and you're like, no, you need to work under our umbrella, because I like that style,
I have a kind of basic approach to it, right? Focus on making your friends, because enemies will make themselves, right? If you go around trying to make enemies, you're just doing the work of other people. So
we're all ultimately here to have fun.
You pick the right enemies, because in my case, I'm at war with the group right now. I've actually made more friends than enemies, because there's other groups, other organizations that have wanted to see these guys get taken down a peg, and someone's actually done it to them. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten some people PMing me, it's like, dude, that was freaking awesome. That was hilarious that you did. And it's just been great all around. And not to mention, a good war with another group can really energize your own guild or organization. Yeah. I got my own guys. We're making memes. We're all getting ready for the next one.
Well, especially a Star Citizen, where you really don't have anything other than player-generated content to do anything with.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of steer the question a little bit, how do you guys handle interactions with your guilds between alliances, namely in talking about like merging and some inevitable conversations of, you picking up alliance guild members picking up your guild members? How do y'all approach that, or what are some of the struggles y'all have encountered with that?
I don't do merges ever.
We stopped doing merges.
As in accepting merges, or
yeah, so
never.
Like sometimes there's a defector group from an alliance guild of maybe 5-10 members, or sometimes they're like, listen, we can't take it over there. We want what you're selling. How do y'all approach those?
That's happened to me a couple times.
One, the incoming group can't be too big. I suggest, and if your group, anyone who's listening is going through this, never take more than 30% of your own member base. So if you have a guild of 30 people and there's 15 that are approaching you going, hey, we want to join, I would advise against it, because that they're just essentially going to enter your guild and they're going to take over the culture of your guild. So I'd be very wary of that. And I've always had a policy ever since I've been running guilds, clans, communities, of if you come to me wanting a merger, this isn't a merger. You're joining my group. You're going through the same processes that any other person goes through. Some of your members will make it through, some might not, but it's still taken on a case-by-case basis, and we don't play any favorites.
That's our same approach.
Yeah, we've
pretty much to a word.
When we actually started on ArcAge, there was 40 of us, and we were having a good time. And we had actually come from Guild Wars, and on Guild Wars 2 we had a lot of alliances, and we were working with a lot of the big guilds. Well, when ArcAge came out, a lot of them came over to ArcAge. We're like, oh, this is the server we're going to be on. They're like, great, let's do it. And so they all popped over, and by the end of the day, a lot of the leadership wanted to go back to Guild Wars 2 within weeks. Well, a lot of them wanted to stay. So we ended up absorbing over 60 players from like 3 different guilds, all within like 3 weeks. And I pretty much spent, like you said, I went through a recruiting process. All right, you'll get to go sit in a meeting with me, and we get to interview you. Next, okay, interview you. I was so exhausted doing like 10 interviews a day. I was just like, talk myself raw. But pretty much, if you don't do that, then you don't know what you're getting. And like Poison Taco said, they're basically coming in to take over your culture. Now, that doesn't mean I hold like strong authority in a guild. So at that end of the day, if they don't like it, they can get out. And this is how it's going to be. And I've driven we'll do a mass recruit, get like 50 players. I'll drive 30 of them out of the guild because they're just like, nope, that's not the type of game we want to play. And I'm like, that's great. There's the door, because this is how it rolls. And if you don't like it, I'm not shifting to your culture just to keep 30 players.
Yeah. That's the hard part too, is when even if you're taking up to like 30% of your player bases, I think I've had this happen 4 or 5 times, smaller scale, nothing like 30 or 40 people, but we've had up like about 10 come over before. Mostly it's due to inactivity. That's a big thing in Star Citizen. And at the time, Squid Incorporated was doing things that no other group was doing. We had weekly events, novel content with other groups, 50-person events on the regular. All the stuff you see on the big streams, but just behind closed doors. Nice. And it always happened that we had maybe 1 or 2 who came along for the ride because they wanted to continue to play with people that they were familiar with, but they were not on board with the org culture. So I think I was watching something and it said, well, how do you get good at hiring? There's no such thing. You have to be good at firing. And I think that carries over to running a group with culture, is you have to stand by your values and what you want to build, and don't be afraid to let people voluntarily associate with a different group.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing is, I don't need generally to go in and tell you to leave.
Yeah.
Most people will do it on their own because you're not clicking with them. And since, unlike a real job where, you have a paycheck and other reasons why you would hang out, the only thing that you have really at the end of the day to stick to any guild is, do you like the people you're around?
Yep.
And do you like what you're doing? And if you don't, you move on, and there's no harm in that. And it just all depends on, and honestly, we have a lot of long-standing friends that did that because, I was in your guild. I didn't really like how hostile and everything like that everybody is, because we're basically a bunch of brothers that beat up on each other, and then. But if you beat up on us, then we all get together and beat up on you.
Yeah.
So if you're not comfortable with that environment, that's great. You can still be friendly with us. And if you're respectful enough to actually step up and go, hey, this isn't exactly working, we're going to step out, but thanks, then we can have a long-term relationship afterwards. Mm-hmm. Then I can ally with the guild you decide to make, because you still know we're a useful asset, same vice versa. So that's always important too. This is for all players out there. Be respectful to the guild leaders when you leave. Information and communication is key. Even if you're just a player who's going to go AFK for a month, if you tell the guild leader, hey, real life is hitting me, great, no problem. You can sit virtually indefinitely and hold, until you decide you want to come back. But if you just blip off the radar, you've been inactive for a month, boot. So it's all about that
communication. So much of our respect, and guild leaders talk. They want to know where you're coming from, and when they're like, yeah, they had an IRL thing. If they're coming back, that's cool. Yeah, they were great. They let me know when they left. I mean, that's big. It's big. Mm-hmm. And that's something that. Going dark, don't ever go dark. Just
I have a guy in my my Arcade guild who is in a foreign military force, and he just has to go off for a month and a half, 2 months, and he's just always like, "Yep, I'm going dark. All right, later," and then all of a sudden 3-4 months later, he'll pop up, hey, I got time to play, and he'll play for 2 months, and then all of a sudden, I have to go dark again, and so it's always good to have that relationship. I mean, he's always communicative about it.
Let me speak to a different point in this subject. You've talked about the idea of absorbing other guilds. I want to talk about the fact of leaving a guild actively for either my own or other groups. The important thing to note is that you should be respectful even if it costs you some social anxiety. The reason is that is the only bread, the only thing that we have to show at the end of the day is your word. And when your word breaks, it's never going to come back. Never, ever. And other guild leaders will talk. You will try your same circles. It won't work. You know why? Because everybody's already known what you are. And when you leave, be on the best footing. Be on the best possible chance you have that either you could be absorbed into a guild and you go through their processes, or you start your own, which is another popular thing. And that all things that the other GMs have
yes,
said.
Zeb, we're familiar with your popular thing.
It is what it is.
And that it's funny. It brings that full circle, because we just talked about one of the best things you can do to your enemies is make them your friend. When you leave a group, you have the potential entering the next one to be the pilot of that sort of relationship and enhance everybody's gameplay. And you may never directly get thanked for it or see that in your game, but kind of passively, it's going to enhance everybody's experience around you. And when you sit down in your valuable time to play, it'll just be that much richer. So, don't preclude people from developing that.
And ultimately, too, if you're a person that finds that you are not clicking in a lot of different guilds, and you don't know why, and generally speaking, it's often that you're just disagreeing with decisions made by leadership, and that rubs you the wrong way, you might need to, put the rubber where your mouth is and try to give
you
a
might
shot
be a
at
guild
leading.
leader instead.
You might need to give it a shot, and it's important to observe what you think the failings are of other guild leaders that you've seen, and try not to, and you're going to learn along the way. And I think that's ultimately the source of this channel, right? Is you're going to learn that, hey, gain some insight on there was a reason they were doing some of these things that drove you nuts. And then sometimes, hey, there were things that the leaders frankly didn't need to do. Everyone has their own different community style, and that's okay. It truly is awesome, and ultimately your job is a job of devotion to your players. And that's ultimately what the job is.
Always make it better with
Black. And I've actually gone back and forth. I've gone from being
unless
a
you're
follower.
Taco, your job's a terrorist.
Yeah. I've gone back and forth. Like, I started off as a follower, then I became an admin in a large community. I helped that grow quite a bit. And then I kind of decided, like, hey, well, if no one's going to do it right, you might as well do it yourself. And that's when I started Part-Time Heroes. And then we had our falling out after Guild Wars 2 and Battlefield 4. I went back into being a follower because I'm like, you know what? I'm done this for now. I don't want to run anything. And then after more years, and in the Star Citizen world, of course, organizations there are very fickle. They can die just as quickly as they're formed up. And after bouncing around quite a bit there, I'm like, okay, screw it. Again, if no one's going to do it right, you might as well do it yourself.
Problem is when you're the type of personality that probably is going to lead a group or be a part of leadership in a group, then you subsume your personality under somebody else's. You have to those three things, if they match up, you can subsume your desire to lead, your desire to create for somebody else's and help them achieve their vision. But if not, it's always going to be bad.
Well, yeah, so nobody else from Plague wanted to go play the MechWarrior Online, but except for one friend. And and he's like, "Hey, I found this org. Let's go join it." Okay, cool. Very military, very organized. Really liked it. Liked how they laid everything out, all that stuff. But there were some flaws in the chain of command, some real bad bumps of leadership, and the end result was that as a person who is normally runs a guild and everything like that, I ran into that roadblock where I'm like, you need to fix this. This needs to be done. And I became a very loud, vocal person on the forums, and it ended up becoming a clash. And I was realizing, I'm like, I'm not a follower. I like your systems. I like how you're doing things. But since you're not willing to change them to my vision, clearly I need to leave. And eventually moved on from them. But most of that was because the game was starting to fail too. And, when games kind of become stale, a lot of people turn guns internally anyway. And I didn't want to be the catalyst that created any division in there. And I was like, I don't want to end this. And I spoke with leadership. We worked everything out. But, it's like, I'm going to leave because I don't want to break off squads and people rage quitting and like going and doing other things and like then damaging what you've got going here. So.
Yeah, and I've been in a similar situation recently too, and personally for me, I have enjoyed it so much because I took my leadership hat and I was like, over here, buddy, I don't have to wear you right now, and it's like completely liberating to be able to play with your guild, integrate into another guild, and like I don't care what decisions they make. Like they could be dumb, I could say they're dumb. I don't care. It's their guild. I'm a peon. I'm just a little guy. You tell me what to do. Work. Where do I go hit? You want me to go hit that guy? I'll go hit that guy. That's so liberating sometimes. Like, it's just like, heck yeah.
Nobody can beat 100% of the time.
And what's important, too, is communicating, because right now, like, we're in a transition. We're like, hey, we're about to pull out of that guild, and we're going to go play Arcade Unchained. And it's like, it's on me to be like, hey, we've been here. Here are my members. Here's what we're going to be doing. Just wanted to let you know. Here's the date this will probably happen. And then after that, whatever. And it's that's just, again, that goes back to, like, I'm leaving as myself, but I'm also leaving with other people, and it's like you got to lay that out and explain that to leadership, and just tell them how it is, you know.
So how do you respond to that as leadership, right? That's the flip side. So say 30% of your members tell you that they're going to go start their own thing, and I haven't experienced this personally, but I've seen it happen from other people who made a quick pass through mine from another one. So if say that they play their cards, I mean, how do you do that? Do you honor that? Do you continue to play with them? What does it depend on for you guys?
For me, it ultimately comes down to reasons, right? So a reason for us, we are that group that's leaving, and we're not 30%. We are, I would say, 10%. And we are that group that's leaving, and it's because, hey, we're going to a game y'all aren't playing. You know, Arcades Unchained came out, y'all are not going there. Even if you were, we're still going to do our own thing. Just letting you know who we are. I have never been on the receiving end of having a clique within our guild leave. That said, I have experienced many cliques within larger guilds leave and been sort of a counsel to that. And it's like, ultimately, they have to find what they want. You know, this clique is playing together for a reason. They have some glue that exists. All right, and whatever that glue is, the people in the leadership that are leaving does not share that with them, which is absolutely fine. And so it's like, okay, either, you know, we have a broad spectrum of other homes that may have that, or is anyone within your clique showing signs of leadership? And potentially, do they want to spin up and do their own thing? And of course that's, you know, that's always risky, but it's like, and that's somewhat what Zeb's group a little bit, but that's much larger scale than what I'm talking. But yeah, that's you know, it's like if there's signs of leadership, then whatever, you know, a new guild has sprouted from that.
We have dealt with it many times actually, and the big thing to do as a leader is you have to identify that those cliques exist, and see when tensions between cliques happen, because when those tensions happen, that's when those divisions can occur. And how you handle that often affects how those cliques deal with you later on. There is actually a clique that came out of Tempest Wolves and joined Plague. Then they left Arcade, so they moved on, and then now they're potentially going to be joining us again in Arcade Unchained. So it's like you got to think of them more like they're a small strike team alliance, and you got to kind of treat them as that. You absorb them as much into your guild as you can, but they clearly have their own culture, their own little communications and things like that, and they're always going to be that. And as long as you accept that for what they are, they'll actually respect that back usually, and you'll see them come back. You'll see them, even if they break off, they'll be in an alliance with you. They'll not rage you. They'll do things like that because you treated them with the respect of their decisions.
And I will say this much: if you're on the receiving end of a clique like that, you never, under any circumstance, put the figurehead or the leader of that group in a position of leadership within your own guild. Never do that. That's a benefit to nobody. And you ask them, like, when it comes to the guild, you guys incorporate as individuals, which I think you guys all kind of covered. It's like, y'all incorporate as individuals. You're going to be playing together. That's fine. That's the whole point. Like, we've all got cliques within our guild anyway. They're going to be playing games together. That's cool. The point is they will be exposed to other people. And if they find people that match their play style, then they'll stay. And if they don't, they'll leave. And that's okay. And sometimes the clique will leave together, or sometimes a 10-man clique will only leave 3 people behind. Well, that's 3 new members for you. That's just how it works.
Sometimes the cliques, the formed divisions in your guilds are formed because of poor leadership, and poor leadership means you're not there. You're not there for the players. And if nobody in your leadership has been around person A, and person A starts playing with person B, then guess what? Person A and person B have a stronger relationship to each other than they do to your leadership, and that's a problem. That's a problem you've created because you don't have time for them. and that they will notice.
And everyone's got their own way of leading, and that's definitely based off the size of organization and the breadth of influence you want to control. Speaking from me personally, and this will not be shared by my peers here, to a certain extent, I don't think. I like to have a knowledgeable one-on-one relationship with every member of my guild. I know them by name. I know their life situations, should they so choose to share. Every single one of them, and there's zero exception to that, and that keeps us, that forces us to stay small, and that's okay. And as you branch, when you have 300 people in your Discord, you can't do that. Like, that's very difficult, and that's
There's
okay.
no time.
It all depends on what type of community you want to have. So me being like that forces us to stay small. That's what we want. You have to ask yourself.
Perfect example of we do our annual cookouts. Everybody in the guild is welcome, and that face-to-face interaction creates bonds that virtual just doesn't do. People join. Guilds become like jobs where they just go, well, I go there because I want this resource or access to these tools, and they have the best whatever, or they're a really good raiding guild, and I want to be able to get through the contents or whatever like that. But when you go to a guild cookout, you make those bonds of friendship that are beyond that. Sit down and drink a beer and eat a brat with somebody, and it changes your aspect of your relationship with that guild.
Yes.
Well, I think that's our time for tonight, unless you guys want to keep it going. I think we've had a lot of great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we'll go ahead and tie it up. It's just been awesome. There's a lot of things to consider, and how your people interact is, everyone's going to be unique. They truly are. Obviously we're just being a resource of discussion, and ultimately it's up to you as a leader to fill the waters and decide what type of what are your goals. And that's something we talked about initially, is laying out your goals. And there's overarching community goals as far as how you want to serve your members. And then you definitely have to be more specific when you want to enter into a title. And that's, at the end of the day, thanks for the sub there. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to is, you have got to have clear goals, communicate those effectively to your members, and then no one will be in the dark. And a lot of these issues that we're speaking of will never happen in the first place. But I'd like to thank everyone. Sorry, go ahead, Mouse.
I was about to say, and by the way, Party Squid, thanks for coming out.
Had a good time. Thanks for having me.
We hope to have you if you want to come back anytime. So you are a good conversationalist, and keep some interesting perspectives. We could always use more perspectives here.
Absolutely.
And that's how war were declared.
And then there's Poison Taka, who just wants to go to war.
All right, guys. Well, y'all have a good night, and thank you to everyone for coming out, and thank you again to Party Squid, our first-time guest here. Y'all have a good night, and we'll catch you on the next stream.
And real quick, make sure check out MMO Grind with Puka and I. We got another interview. We got a game dev this week, so we'll be exploring. I have some of his history and work history, and his ideas on game development. So hopefully you guys can catch that. That'll be on 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 Central on Tuesdays.
All right. Well, y'all have a good night, and thank you very much, and catch you next.